Thank you for watching today and welcome again to another episode of El Hangeo. I am joined with a very special guest today who has a variety of experiences and wonderful family history that has influenced where he is today and why he is affecting positive change in our community. So I will let him better introduce himself in a second, but for the time being, thank you, Segun, for joining us and welcome to El Hangeo.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. So I see that you are in your traditional little cubicle background where I have seen you so many times take Zoom meetings for national events, for local events, for regular, BECMA meetings. I thank you so much for your time because you are a very, very busy person. Why don't you tell us a little bit of what it is that you do before we go into your quote unquote, history?
There are actually not many people who think that I leave this space and that I just have all of my suits and ties in the corner over here and never leave the office. But well, like you said, my name is Segun, and I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of BECMA, the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. And it is the chief advocacy group for Black businesses here in the Commonwealth. Our mission is to advance the economic well-being of Black businesses, organizations, and people. And we do this through our advocacy work, through business and leadership development, and through building strong partnerships with folks like yourself.
Before we go into that and how you are, helping BECMA and the Black community advance, not just in Massachusetts, but across the country, let's talk a little bit about your origin story. Right? It's just, I feel like whenever I talk to you, it feels like it's a superhero story because it's just so wonderful and inspiring. So I want to talk about your origin story. It's very much like the comic books, but with a much more meaningful, lesson, right? Your grandfather was a very big influence in your life. You've talked about this in the press. People that know you know this. But you don't go around just saying, oh, yes, I come from, advocacy, leadership, history, and backgrounds. You actually just embody that lesson of life that he gave you and that your family gave you. And I assume that, I'm going to venture to assume that the reason why you're so involved in community and in advocating for community is because of the way you were raised. So can you talk a little bit about your family history and how it's shaped who you are today?
I'm just going to say at the outset that you're one of the only people that's going to be good at getting me to talk about myself, because I love asking questions and learning about other people, but talking about myself always gets awkward. But for you, I will talk about my origin story. Well, let's see. I was raised here in Boston, and so I've been involved in many different ways. So, I guess the long and short of it, back in 1919, Earl Wesley Lawson was born in New Orleans and ventured off to Tennessee to lead a church at a very young age, and after went to Morehouse College, where he obtained his Bachelor of Arts. And it was while he was at Morehouse that he met a young, precocious kid named Michael, and they maintained their friendship for many, many years after that. And it's actually a few years after my grandfather met Michael that Michael's father changed his and his son's name to Martin Luther. And so, it was at Morehouse College that my grandfather met and became friends with Martin Luther King Jr. And first of all, I'll say every old Black person you meet will say that they knew Martin Luther King. So I just want to say that this is not some crazy made up story. I do have proof that this happened. Claiborne Carson, who's an amazing historian, actually put together a collection of all the King papers. And you will find letters between my grandfather and Dr. King in those big red books. So I just want to say at the outset, this part is true. But that's not the part that matters. The part that matters is that when my grandfather was here in Massachusetts, he was a pastor in Malden over Emmanuel Baptist Church, and it was during his time here that he served essentially as a chief lieutenant for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was the organization that Dr. King helped to found, and was leading a lot of the advocacy work here in Massachusetts during the Civil Rights Revolution. And then in the later 70s and 80s was working a lot to help people who were addicted to drugs and alcohol to not only wean them off of those addictions, but to connect them to jobs and housing and things like that. So all of that said, you know, my grandmother, Frances Lawson, also played a huge role in my upbringing. She herself was involved in community, not just around the church, but also in helping those who were disadvantaged, and then also just being an advocate in the Black community. And then my own mother and father, my mom worked at City Hall for 25 years, was a member of SEIU 888, and herself was involved in politics and community development. All that said, all of this got poured into me, and there wasn't a day that I wasn't somehow involved in what was going on in the community. And so, you know, I guess it's kind of your opening, it's kind of a natural progression as to how I got here. I never thought I would be where I am right now. I mean, naturally you want to rebel, and I didn't come into my age of reason until my junior year of college, and actually paying attention to what was happening. It's funny that you're asking this question, because I just literally came from sitting on a panel that was all about legacy.
Mhm.
And so in thinking about my grandfather, there was one thing that he said to me that I've shared in various places, but it explains everything I'm doing. So I wound up going to Morehouse as well. And my second final semester senior year, I was driving down to Atlanta, and I went to go visit him as he lived in Hartford. And during my trip there, I don't remember what we were watching, but he made the statement that we have to stop confusing motion with progress. And that was the last time I saw him. And so that experience obviously stuck with me, because it was the last time I saw him alive. And also those particular words have stuck with me. And every day, everything I've been doing ever since has been guided by that belief that you know, we have to stop settling for the surface level stuff, which is why when we talk about the wealth gap, when we talk about disparities, a lot of how we still have these things that my grandfather and others were fighting against 50 years ago, I would argue is because we have been settling for surface level solutions as opposed to something substantive.
That's a wonderful way of framing your upbringing. And what I love that you just mentioned is that you had, you know, that coming of age moment junior year, right? Because yes, you could have been immersed in it from childhood and going to all of these advocacy events or programming or protests or whatever you want to call it, or service even at church. But you had something and you had to click, right? So when you went to Morehouse, because you also attended the same college your grandfather did, how was it living with that legacy? I mean, growing up, coming of age, becoming a young man, right? And why do you think it finally clicked?
It was the murder of Troy Davis by the state of Georgia. So, you know, I was almost the disappointment of the family, because when I graduated high school, I graduated from Latin Academy with a 1.9 GPA. And you have to work very hard to get something that low. I did work very hard to make sure I mean, they essentially kicked me out, because they were like, just give them the degree, because I'm just making all the other grades. You know, if they're grading on a curve, I was making us look bad. So, and you know, by going to another college, I was able to boost the GPA and get to Morehouse. And I really just wanted to be there because, you know, I think everyone has a figure in their life that they look to as God, whether positive or negative. But at the end of the day, there's that one figure who plays a critical role in your life. And so that was my grandfather for me, as you noted. And so of course you want to make the people that you look up to proud. So that's really kind of what drove me to go down there. So that's really kind of what drove me to go down there. Also, because Atlanta just has a bunch of Black people, and Boston, we also have a bunch of Black people here. But in terms of, at least back when I was growing up, which actually feels really good and really weird to say back when I was growing up, because I feel old saying that, but also the fact that we can say that there are more Black people and other people of color in important positions and more of us taking over spaces. I think that's great. I'm glad it's not how it was when I was growing up. Anyway, all that said, I was still playing around. I was still going with the motions. I mean, I was doing well in my studies, but I wasn't paying attention to what was happening around me. College can be, especially when you're away for college, it can be a fantasy world. You live in a bubble. And so, and Barack Obama was elected the same year that I went to school back in 2008. And so, of course, you just feel like everything is on the rise because things seem to be changing. But then 3 years later, 2011, September 21st, the state of Georgia decided to move forward with carrying out a death sentence for Troy Davis, who back in the 80s had been accused and then convicted of murdering a police officer. And despite the fact that several months, really years before the state carried out the execution, you had witnesses recanting, you had jurors saying they felt pressured and didn't agree with their decision anymore. You had the Pope and Jimmy Carter and all these people saying they didn't say don't kill him, they said let's do a new trial because new evidence had been discovered. And the state just ignored all that, and because they are bloodthirsty. And so junior year, a year left in school. Excuse me. You know what? I was even wrong. It wasn't even my junior; it was my senior year. Mm-hmm. This is because I remember this is the September, 2011. So, long-ish story short, we, myself and a bunch of my friends on the campus, organized 300 students from the Atlanta University Center, which includes Morehouse, Spelman, and Clark Atlanta. And we worked with a couple of community organizations to secure, the big tour buses. Mm-hmm. And we bussed 300 students down to Jackson, Georgia, which is an hour away, to protest at the actual prison where they were going to carry out the sentence. And before Ferguson, we experienced the militarized police force, the intimidation tactics, and the threats, and actually several students were tased just for stepping onto the highway. And so, all of that entire experience kind of catapulted me into not just paying attention to what was going on around me, but then taking part in changing something. Because if you remember, so that September 2011, less than 6 months later, February of 2012, we all get introduced to another young Black man at the moment of his death. That's Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida, not that far away from Morehouse. And so we were engaged in that too. So, I think those two things happening back to back really forced me to pay attention and to be involved, and then to really call back on my previous experiences growing up and being in rooms with Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and Albert Sampson and our John Lewis, C.T. Vivian. I mean, all these great civil rights leaders that I really just was taking for granted until that moment.
Yeah. And so coming back to Boston and realizing that things had changed, but like you said, on the surface level, what made you continue to get involved? You have risen, if not fast, but I think exponentially to your talent. I think that it's fair, the level of success that you have had, and let's not label it success, right? Let's label it just visibility that you have had equals the amount of work that you're doing. But when you came back here, what made you choose, okay, I'm going to continue in this line of work, like my parents, like my grandparents, et cetera, et cetera? Why not do it silently while having a quote unquote normal job that earns you a steady salary and allows you to go on 2 weeks vacation every year?
Well, no, and I'm happy you moved away from defining it as success, because, and I think that's right, and certainly I would say the same, because you know, our definition of success in this country is totally misconstrued. It's just not, it's not correct in how we define it, especially through imagery. You know, I say to people who often say success in their introductions, you know, tell me that I'm successful when we win. And you know, right now with COVID impacting our businesses, many are having to close for good.
Yeah.
You know, when we change that 2,000 Black firms to 20,000, I will let someone say that I'm a success. But until then, you know, we're still struggling, and that is not successful. So so I appreciate you doing that. You know, what compels me, I guess a couple of things. One is, you know, by some people's standards, I am short. And so maybe it's my Napoleon complex, where I get angry very easily, and or pissed off, I should say. And the things that piss me off are really, the one thing that really pisses me off is that we are still talking about the things that my grandfather was talking about 50 years ago. And I mean, the level of rage, I would say, when we look at the statistics for whether it be the Black community, the Latino community, how 50 years ago things are either the same or worse pre-COVID. Everyone wants to blame COVID now for, so many disparities. It's like we've been talking about this for decades. It's just like now everyone is forced to see these disparities and the impact it has on all of our communities, not just that community over there. So I would say that's the number one thing, is the fact that we're still talking about these things, because I get bored very easily. And so I hate having conversations about where we are today, or where do we go from here, as if there are new solutions to these problems, when there really aren't. It's just that we've never actually enacted these solutions. We just talk about what we need to do. So that'd be the number one thing. I would say also recognizing my own, for lack of a better word, my own privilege. I mean, I have the fortune of the upbringing that we've mentioned, of where I've gone to school, who I grew up around. You know, I grew up on the second pew of 12th Baptist Church, which, you know, when I was growing up was led by Michael E. Haynes, who was a huge figure in the Roxbury and Boston community and had all these political connections. And the church itself was filled with change agents and leaders of different organizations and companies, and you know, in the community. And so I have been tremendously fortunate at who I've been around and who I've been able to draw from. And so for me, it's about like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be using those connections. I'm supposed to be utilizing what I've learned for the benefit of the people who have poured into me. And so, to be honest, I didn't really even see it as a choice, but rather this is, you know, I have to use my privilege for those who would not be able to do some of these things. The fact that I worked for a city councilor when I came back to Boston, Councilor Yancey, I learned a whole lot about policy, legislation, made a lot of connections in City Hall. So I need to use that for the benefit of my people who don't have those connections, and a lot of people who don't know what the process is. So yeah, I didn't really see it as a choice, but rather this is always what I'm supposed to have been doing if I want to stop being angry.
Does it ever feel like too heavy of a responsibility to bear? And how do you deal with that? And the second question is, for someone who did not grow up with that upbringing, with that amazing privilege, like you very wisely recognize it is, how can they still feel like I'm going to make a difference in my community?
Well, to the first question, I think anyone in this position can feel that it is too much if you believe that you are the only one that can do it. So one of the things that I would say, so I don't believe I have been successful, but I do believe that the organization BECMA has had some successes. And the way we have achieved those successes has been by working with other people. So growing up in Boston, we have a nonprofit economy, right? Our economy runs on three things: nonprofits, panel discussions, and politics. And so, and for all of them, it's everyone saying how great they are. That is, a lot of hot air in Boston. And so, so for the nonprofits, a lot of nonprofits before the pandemic worked in silos. Everyone wants to be the one that saved the world. And so you should give all of your money to my group and not the other one, because we're the ones that are changing people's lives. The pandemic, of course, the one silver lining, if one can even say that, is that it forced everyone to have to work together. Nonprofits, either their funding sources were running out because other folks weren't generating revenue, or the communities you were trying to support, you couldn't do it by yourself anymore because everyone needed help, and there's only so much capacity that one organization has, no matter how many people work there. So I guess it's a roundabout way of saying, sure, from time to time, I do feel some pressure, and it can get heavy to bear, but it is not as heavy as it would be if I operated like I'm the savior. And like I'm the only one that can do it. And I've also surrounded myself with a great support network, with friends that thank the Lord. Well, I don't know if I should say this, but thank the Lord that no one's ever tapped into my phone to release our text messages, because that'd be the end of a lot of people's careers. But the point is that there are people that I can vent to and who can answer questions, give me advice. And I don't think that I would have survived. I've been with BECMA for almost 3 years now. Wouldn't have survived if I didn't have that network. In terms of people without that privilege making change, the one thing I've always understood is that you as an individual cannot change the world, you by yourself, but you can change someone's. And I think that's the most important thing, because changing one life is changing the world, because that person changes another, et cetera, going on down the road. And I think that for you to do that means that you have achieved, you are successful, that you have done something impactful and meaningful to world history. So I don't think it takes the connections and all that to effect change in your community. And at the end of the day, it's also about getting passionate about a particular issue. So, like, I think I've only been able to do stuff because I don't try to do everything. So, there's what we did in Atlanta. When I came back to Boston, we focused on the body cameras on police officers. That I think we were successful in that effort because we focused on one thing in this massive issue: criminal justice reform and police brutality. We didn't try to do everything. We just said one thing: body cameras, and we wrote the policy. So I think when you're motivated by a particular issue and a particular solution, you don't need the history that I've shared to make the change happen. I mean, history is replete with people who don't have those connections, changing their communities, their country, the region. A lot of times it's the people with those connections that aren't using them for their community. They use it for their own personal advancement. Because of who I grew up around, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that and, you know, live with my parents would never let me home if I acted like that, you know. But I think more often than not, it's people who don't have those connections who make a lot of change happen, because they are purely motivated by changing not just their conditions, but those of the others around them. So, but I would say the focus should just be changing someone's world, and focusing on one issue. And I think I will not accept the premise, but rather say, you know, it's absolutely possible for people to change, to make an impact, whatever your networks may be at the moment. People recognize game. You know, people will recognize the intent. So I think that's what people will respond to.
And starting one day at a time and showing the importance of community, right? I think that is the biggest lesson that anyone can hear or understand. It's all about community. And I love how you framed it, that we are not saviors. You can't do everything by yourself, because unfortunately our country has such an individualized belief system that, you know, I can do it by myself and I will be successful. And it's like self-made person, right? There's this title of self-made billionaire or self-made artist or self-made XYZ, that we forget the sincere necessity and power of community, even if that is just a community of people that like to knit together. You know, the importance of just having a surrounding where you can be yourself. So talking about the involvement of communities here, at least in Boston and in the country in general, let's go back to the surface level change, right? And how, or what is the difference between the surface level change and the actual change that's going to cause effect? For you, what is the difference and what needs to happen?
Yeah, well, you know, so what people have to understand about Boston is that Boston has never, in my estimation, been committed to, so, you know, as an organization, we're focused on eliminating the racial wealth gap, which is a byproduct of systemic racism. And so when it comes to that systemic racism, Boston, again, in my opinion, has never been focused on actually eliminating systemic racism, but rather appearing to eliminate it. And it's an important nuance and distinction, because everything we do up until now is symbolic. You know, we celebrate ideas rather than actions or impact. And so I don't know if it's a byproduct of having 1,000 different schools, you know, located in the city, where all, you know, institutions of higher learning are idea factories, and I don't know if that's part of the impact, but you know, so what it looks like is celebrating First Black in 2021. The second part is in, you know, tying to First Black. Then I'll take Kim Janey, for example. So Kim Janey becomes first Black, first woman mayor of the city, because our white male mayor decided to get a job promotion and head off to DC. And so Boston celebrates this Black woman who's a district city councilor becoming mayor of Boston, because it makes us appear to not be a racist city anymore, that there is finally a Black person in this seat. And then the same city expects this mayor who just got the job, and there's an election 6 months later, to solve all of the issues in the world plaguing the city, simply because she's in that position. And so I think that's one of the issues that we have is believing that that the one person will solve our problems. The same thing that companies do. Companies will hire a Black or brown person to be their chief equity officer or chief diversity officer and say, you fix the racism. And then they'll keep doing what they're doing. And then that person won't have the resources that they need. It'll literally be that one person rather than a whole department. They got no budget. And then, you read all these studies now showing that chief diversity officers are burning out left and right after like a year on the job because they're told to fix a system they did not create and that they are not sustaining. I liken it to, when I was a kid, my parents, every Saturday you had to clean your room. Well, the way I cleaned my room was putting all the stuff under my bed or throwing everything in the closet and making it look like I cleaned my room. But really, you just hid stuff to make it look like it. But who are you kidding? So anyway, so that's what Boston has done, right? We make these symbolic gestures, and then believe that is. First of all, we put it under the guise of progress. But at the end of the day, putting a Black face in a position or the fact that we're celebrating when a Black person, first Black CEO or whatever, like these things don't change. Again, it's to this point about community. And because as you mentioned, we're such an individualized nation, the one person doing something is put on the entire community, as opposed to, no, that one person was successful, but there are 400,000 other people that need some support. So that's the problem. How we fix it is actually putting our money where our mouths are and our actions where our words are. We would take up a whole day talking about all the solutions that have been offered. I would rattle them off, but BECMA.org. We have a whole policy agenda for your listeners to read through that are just some of the solutions. The progress comes with where we put our money, and then, like I said, the action. So how we're making our investments, but then also who are we putting in all of these leadership positions, not just the chief equity officer, but I want the CEO position. I want the COO. I want the chair of the board. I want positions on the important committees that make financial decisions for these companies. I want the land back. I want all these barriers that they put in place to keep from doing business with us removed. These things that it is as if a lot of we treat some of these barriers as if they came from Mount Sinai, and that the Lord himself said, this is how you do business, or this is how the system should be set up, as if someone didn't sit down who is flesh and blood like us and put these things together. Anyway, I'm rambling, but I'll just say that, the problem, what we have to do is get past this notion that the symbolic is going to free us, right? What we believe as an organization, and certainly what I do as an individual, is that the development of some communities cannot coexist with the underdevelopment of others. And so long as you think that you thriving means that everything is great, it is that signals the downfall of all of us. Fannie Lou Hamer said, "Nobody's free until everybody's free." And so for me, that is the framing of progress, liberating everybody.
What would your next 10 to 30 years look like? And what can one person do to take action?
I want the wealth, because you're right, the image of the country is changing, but the wealth or the face of who controls the wealth is not. And so as exciting, I guess, as it is that the nation will have to more fully embrace the fact that it's always been brown anyway. This has never been a white country, as James Baldwin would say. You know, the Wall Street Journal just put out an article maybe a month ago that said over the next 10 years, $65 trillion is going to be changing hands. And I don't know how many of our people are getting access to that money. So there's the very real chance of America just becoming a larger version of South Africa, where the power and the money are still dominated by white Americans, even though the majority of the country are not white Americans. So the ideal scenario for the next 10 to 20 years is that we are building wealth for Black and Brown communities, because that will be the only way that we ensure that whatever that shift is, that we don't continue having these disparities. In terms of what people can do about it, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't say you can visit becma.org and get involved, and everyone has a role to play. So like you just said, people aren't going to be leading organizations, they're not going to work at BECMA, they're not going to, whatever, but you have to do something, but it also has to be sustained. So, I know several years ago when Black Lives Matter was really taking the country by storm and a lot of folks were participating in the protests, folks just figured, well, I'm going to show up to that one protest and I've done my duty as a person for the rest of my life to make change happen. And it's all about what you do the day after. And so, I think, for you as a person, whatever you look like, it's about continuing to educate yourself on the issues and what's going on. I think it's, yes, supporting our businesses in all these different ways. I think it's also how you engage with your family and others in your network. If you are doing something to make change happen, you need to make sure it's not just you. Finally, I would say being involved in community. As a nonprofit, we learn from those in our community. We don't just get up and do stuff. We talk to people, we engage, we're a membership organization. So I think it's incredibly important for people to be involved with the organizations that are at the table and that are helping to make these decisions, because everything, I'll speak for ourselves, everything we do is based on what we are told by our members. Everyone thinks that I'm this brilliant person. I'm a giant parrot. I sit down and listen to what people say, and then I repeat that to the governor and mayors and whatever, right? And so, it's really important to be involved all the time. You take your showers every day, I hope, and it's important that you also be involved in making change happen every single day. It has to become part of your routine. It is not a one-time thing, because certainly the system was not created in a day. And so it was created over time. People sustain it every day. And so therefore your actions have to happen every day if we're going to dismantle it and build the new world.
Thank you very, very much. This was a wonderful conversation to just address our city, our values, our shared intentions to change, which I really, really appreciate. And I really, really can't wait to see how much more you develop through BECMA and our community in the years to come. Thank you.
Well, like I said, thank you. Thank you. It's great to be with you.